Yeah, happy to be with you all. Dr. Alan Christensen here, and this is the last in our ongoing series. This has been a series of webinars about some of the top concerns of those with thyroid disease and some new solutions for them. This was inspired by the World Thyroid Awareness Month in January and sponsored by Thyroid Specific Formulations. So this one is all about iron and the relevance of iron for thyroid health. I'm with you all on Zoom, on Instagram. Facebook had technical difficulties tonight, but yeah, good to connect with everyone here. These have been a lot of fun, and this is going to be one of the, I'm really excited about this particular topic. This is so important for many people. A lot of folks have symptoms that aren't resolved because of this, and many are aware of it, but they struggle to get it to get better. So it's great to have some more ways to help with it. Hello back to Kirsty from Scottsdale. There's many coming on Instagram. Yeah, you're welcome to hang out here on Instagram. You can also come join us in the Zoom audience. In the Zoom audience, you'll be able to see the slides. You can also participate in the Q&A session. So those who are here in the studio audience in Zoom, I'll be speaking for probably half hour, 35 minutes, something like that tonight. And then afterwards, we'll grab a few of your questions in real time. And we'll focus on those that pertain to iron and all things iron and thyroid disease. So good to be with you guys. All right, so we'll dive on in with this. And slides are up and going already. I'll talk about a quick overview of the presentation. We'll go through the details of that, and I'll give a summary of that. The basic idea about improving iron status, we'll talk about when it's relevant, how you know that based upon symptoms, how the lab markers show that, the different scales of iron deficits one might be in, and we'll talk through sorting out the cause. And sometimes there are straightforward causes that can be found. Sometimes there's causes that can be found that may not be able to be helped, like you can't always reverse them. And sometimes there are not clear causes that can be found, that can happen. But in any case, it does make sense to try to track them down when possible. We'll talk about things that can interfere with iron uptake, and we'll talk about easy iron as a new solution for that. So a real quick overview about it, that's our sponsor, is that most who do need iron can do well with this at a 1 daily dose. This can be taken first thing in the morning. This can be taken with the daily reset bundle. And this can be taken even that first hour after thyroid medication. So all some things that are distinct about it. So yeah, 1 a day. I'm really jazzed about that. Okay, so first off, why does iron matter? Why is this important? Well, because it can affect a lot of symptoms. Here's a big long list of things: fatigue and weakness, hair thinning, insomnia, brain fog can go with that. Headaches, you don't almost think about, but headaches and migraines can be really big signs of that. Sleep disturbances, insomnia, also ones that aren't thought of quite as much, but can be very relevant to iron status. Burning hands and feet, numbness and tingling in the extremities can associate with that as well. Sore tongue, burning tongue, swollen tongue, scalloped tongue, those can all associate. Hair thinning, easy hair breakage, hair weakness, poor hair regrowth, all relevant. And a little nuance there, the biggest two factors for controllable hair loss, especially in women, are going to be androgenic alopecia. So it's driven by androgenic hormones, or iron status. Now, the latter, when it's iron status, the hair loss, the hair thinning, it's more diffuse, it's more even. It's not so much localized to certain areas. But this is often one of the biggest things that makes hair loss persist and not resolve well. So here's some of the big symptoms. Oh, I should mention too, those who are here in the studio audience, if you're jumping in on Zoom, there's a link on drchristensen.com. I'm sorry, if you're jumping in on Instagram, there's a link on drchristensen.com. And I think the link will pop up in the Instagram chat. And you can follow that and come join us on Zoom Live if you wish. And in there, you're welcome to put a question up. In doing so, you can raise your hand. So if you're in Zoom, you've got your participants controls, and in those, you can hit raise hand. And I see a bunch of hands up already. When I'm done, we'll go through and grab those in order and take some good questions. Okay, so here's some ways it can affect people. So why is this relevant to thyroid disease? Well, there's a fair amount of overlap. And one big consideration is that iron levels and ferritin levels can be normal. But even then, this can be low enough to cause symptoms. And I'll just touch on this briefly. There's been data arguing that because iron is so essential for thyroid hormone utilization, the mildest deficits of iron that may not cause problems in any other circumstances can cause problems if one also has thyroid disease. So yeah, if you're lacking even a trace amount of iron, your body can't use thyroid hormones as effectively. And what that can do is that can make it to where the iron by itself might have never been an issue, and the thyroid deficit by itself might not have been an issue. But the two together can cause these symptoms in spades. So they synergize and in a bad way. And this can occur even with normal levels. We'll talk a bit more about various iron tests and what they mean, but even the mildest deficits of iron storage can cause some of these issues for those with thyroid disease. One study that was recently done argued that roughly 84% of adults with thyroid disease are symptomatic in some way from being below optimal in iron. So quite prevalent, the vast majority. So yeah, very common. We need iron for thyroid hormones to be formed. We need iron for thyroid hormones to be responded to. So a lot of the enzymes, such as thyroid peroxidase, that are needed for making thyroid hormones, they are heme-dependent enzymes, which means they can't work with marginal iron status. So very central. The other consideration is that a large percent of people with thyroid disease are unable to effectively assimilate iron. And we'll talk about the iron cycle shortly, but there's what comes in, what circulates, and what goes out. And yeah, 30 to 40% of those with autoimmune thyroid disease likely have thyrogastric syndrome. This is also called autoimmune atrophic gastritis. And this is like Hashimoto's of the stomach. This is where the body is attacking the stomach and making it unable to properly assimilate nutrients. And of those nutrients, the first one that tends to show up low is iron. And because of this autoimmune response, iron can look low when you wouldn't otherwise expect it, and it may not respond to common measures like just dietary therapy or common supplementation. The other consideration that's thyroid specific is a good chunk of those with thyroid disease can have celiac disease. An interesting note, draw a distinction between celiac disease and various gluten intolerances or gluten sensitivities. The latter should not impact iron uptake, but celiac disease can. Even if one does consume adequate dietary iron or common forms from supplementation, they may not adequately maintain their iron status. So this is one more reason why this is especially relevant to those with thyroid disease. So now to touch briefly on the overall iron cycle. So how does iron enter the body? What does it do? How does it move around? There's an image here that displays this. And if you're just joining me on Instagram, there's a link that's going to show up in the Instagram chat if it's not up already, and you can follow that, or you can just go to drchristiansen.com and you can find the link to come to see us on Zoom. And here we've got the images. We'll also do some live Q&A there. So iron cycle, we start out with dietary iron, and in the small intestine, that comes into the bloodstream. From there, that's carried by a protein called transferrin and goes to a lot of other places. From there, it's directed to form red blood cells. And it's also used to form the hemoglobin within the red blood cells. It's also used for making tissue iron, the stored forms of iron, such as ferritin. Most of that is stored in the liver. It's also used for making some of those heme-dependent enzymes, like thyroid peroxidase that I mentioned. And to maintain maintain iron balance, iron is also excreted. And that passes out in bilirubin, and that's also passed out as red blood cells are broken down. So red blood cells live somewhere around 3 months. And when they're broken down, the body recycles their hemoglobin, it reuses the iron from them, and the waste products end up becoming bilirubin. So kind of an odd clinical note, but when someone's liver cannot excrete that reabsorb bilirubin, there's no pigment in the stool, and the stools become completely white. So you have liver disease, the stool becomes white because normally the leftover hemoglobin is what creates the pigment. It makes the stool brown. We're also going to lose iron through menstrual blood loss, and then also some from physical activity. And this is just from urination, from sweating, broken down skin cells. There's also some iron lost from broken down muscle tissue. And there's also some lost from impact trauma on the feet. So runners and gals that run can lose a fair amount just from that directly. Now, menstrual blood loss, that can be substantial. So we'll talk in specific numbers about how many milligrams of iron the body stores and uses and how big of a deficit can be. The typical budget is that we're absorbing from the intestinal tract somewhere around 0.5 milligram to 1 milligram of iron per day. That's what comes into the bloodstream. Then the loss from just bilirubin, from normal activity, from urination, that ends up roughly equaling that intake. So there's about 1 milligram or so we lose just by daily operation. Now, a menstrual cycle, that could be an extra 30 to 60 milligrams. So this can be like a month's worth of iron that's lost in just one period. And if your intake is just enough to break even, this can easily create a deficit that can take some time to get caught up on. I see many women that, obviously during their menstrual years, they can be behind, but some can stay behind even a decade or more after they've stopped menstruating. And that's because this deficit is just so large. It takes quite some time, if ever, to reverse that. Let me just get there we go, back in place. Okay. So the thoughts are, why do all these symptoms come about? What are the varying things that low iron does throughout the body? And once you understand the roles of iron and the effects of low iron in the system, a lot of the symptoms start to make sense. So when iron's too low, the red blood cells are immature. And what happens is they're formed from bigger cells that have to shrink. And so when they're not mature, they're not the right size to leave the little capillary beds and carry oxygen to your cells. So you think about the things that could happen if someone had poor lung function, or they were at high elevation, or they were like holding their breath. That's all the stuff that can happen when iron is low, because the body can't deliver oxygen because of the red blood cells. And this can also equate to changes to hemoglobin quality and hemoglobin quantity. The red blood cells have this thing called hemoglobin, and it grabs onto oxygen, but it doesn't hold on to it permanently. It grabs it just tight enough to move it into circulation and unload it at the cells where there's a little bit less oxygen. But if hemoglobin is of low quality or low quantity, you can't do that. You can't move oxygen around. And when that happens, all the body suffers, but nerve tissues are especially vulnerable. So nerve conduction becomes impaired. And that's where a lot of generalized fatigue comes from. That's also where a lot of the brain fog comes up. And if that's severe enough, that's why we can think about the numbness and burning in the extremities. The other consideration is there's some strain on the cardiovascular system. So there's generally a corresponding increase in how much blood has to be circulated and how much work has to be done to circulate that blood. So the whole cardiorespiratory system has to work harder in compensation for that. So dietary iron, where is that coming from? Well, there's two big categories. There's heme foods and non-heme foods. And heme just means blood. So foods that have blood in them, and then foods that don't have blood. So this is animal source iron and plant source iron. I did this chart a while back, and I wrote this article many years ago, and I had a misconception going into it about really the amount of iron in plant foods and the bioavailability of iron in plant foods. Really, even if someone is vegetarian, there's every reason that they can maintain iron status unless their losses are just too great. But there's no reason why those who are vegetarian or vegan would need to be anemic otherwise. Some of these highest sources are heme sources. We look at the fortified cereal, or even just wheat bran, white beans, black-eyed peas. These things are substantial. And the absorption is not as high as it is from red meat. There's less total amount of that absorbed, but the overall amount in milligrams is so great that even once one factors in the lesser absorption, it still ends up being significant or more significant. So plenty of good sources. The problem with someone being chronically low in iron, in most cases, it's not due to a lack of dietary sources. There are many good options. It's more typically an issue of either excess loss or just a small fraction of intake of what is in the diet. And further along this line, when someone is struggling and chronically low in iron, we always want to start with diet and focus on that, but I don't see that turn the tides for people that often. It's not that common that someone can go from being badly low in iron to normal again, just from dietary therapy only. So good things to be aware of. There's actually a longer list in an article I'll get you guys a link for, but yeah, there's many good food sources that are high in quantities of iron, and they can maintain that for those with normal iron absorption and normal iron secretion. So a lot of different tests available for iron. What do these things mean? Well, I can't go through the full diagnostic criteria because all of these are interpreted in the context of one's other markers, in a blood count, in a liver panel, in overall chemical function panels. So generally, though, these are the main ones that focus in on iron. And the one that we think about a lot is ferritin. This is the first thing to show when iron is lacking. Now, ferritin is the main tissue form of iron. This is how iron is primarily stored in the body. And we've got a pretty broad normal range for this, between like 10 and several hundred. One quirky thing about ferritin is that it's an acute phase reactant, which means if there's an inflammatory response in your body, it pushes it up. And that doesn't mean you now have more iron. It just means you've redistributed iron to put more of that into the stored forms. And that can make it look unusually high. So in many cases, if other iron markers are normal or they suggest that iron might be low, but ferritin is up, that's really common from some type of inflammatory process. One of the most common ones being fatty liver disease. Now, the really big point here, there's been papers showing that ferritin has to dip below a threshold to cause symptoms with thyroid disease, but it has to go back up to a higher threshold to reverse the symptoms of thyroid disease. So the biggest ones would be fatigue and hair loss. And if one dips below maybe 50s, maybe 60s, those symptoms can start. And if the world were a simple logical place, we would think that once you got above 50 or 60, those symptoms would go away. But no, once a problem emerges, you've got to get higher than that before those symptoms reverse. So it does take being above roughly 100 or 90 before those symptoms go away for some people. So this is a big conundrum. They may be well within a normal range, but they may have developed symptoms from iron getting too low, and they may not have resolved unless iron comes up to this higher level. Then we think about hemoglobin. This is the main molecule that's carrying the iron. Total iron binding capacity. This is how much the body is trying to take up iron. So this one is actually backward. Transferrin, that's that first form of circulating iron. Serum iron is the main form that's there in circulation. And we've also got the percent of iron compared to how much the blood could hold. And finally, the mean corpuscular volume, how big are the red blood cells? And this all shows normal range and optimal amounts relative to thyroid function. If you're with me on Instagram, these images are available. You can get a link on drchristiansen.com and come and join us on Zoom. And you can also get the replay link. Those who are on Instagram and those who are on Zoom, you can check out the replays from these and you can access these images again in the future. These do also come from, and this image is also in a blog that I wrote that's a deep dive on iron. So if you Google Alan Christensen and iron, you can find this particular chart and quite a bit more for that. So what does it mean when they're low? What are the stages of this dropping off? Well, so in most cases, people think about anemias, and this is what we call iron deficiency anemias. So anemias start down here, and they start out when the body starts getting compromised on the iron in circulation. So when circulating iron starts to get low, we call that anemias. And there's iron deficiency anemias that can be moderate or severe, and there's anemia of chronic disease. So there are some chronic diseases that cause there to be less iron in circulation. In those cases, it's not always clear if it's a bad thing. Sometimes it's adaptive and sometimes it's not helpful to treat that. But in cases of iron deficiency anemias and then latent iron depletion, those are cases to where it does help to treat. So the chart that I'm alluding to talks about the first step, which is a latent iron depletion or LID stage 1. And here, everything is normal, but ferritin is now dipped below optimal. So yeah, the first thing to change is ferritin coming below optimal, and that's a latent iron depletion stage 1. So to be really technical, it's not an anemia, but may as well be. It's going to cause the same symptoms, and it's going to really predicate the same treatment and need the same things to resolve it. If that progresses, then serum iron dips down and we get latent iron depletion stage 2. If things progress further, we'll often start seeing the percent saturations of iron compromise, and we may start seeing hemoglobin go down as well. And then the body gets hungry for iron, and the binding capacity and the transferrin start to go up. So these are all points where we're talking about now a moderate iron deficiency anemia. These same things can worsen for a severe iron deficiency anemia. One brief point about B12 deficiencies is that they can actually cause ferritin to get high, but they almost always involve really big red blood cells, a larger mean corpuscular volume. And this is stuff to where a lot of you all are very savvy and educated. You read your labs, you make sense of these things. That's totally cool. I honor and respect that. It is a great thing to have a relationship with a healthcare provider that can help out, because even with the charts, there are some situations in which some people have thalassemias or they have chronic disease. They have things that can change these interpretations. But once you know from a practitioner that otherwise it can be taken at face value, this tells you really which stage you're at. And I'll talk a bit later about how you can know exactly what your body's iron deficit is, how many milligrams total you're lacking. And that's super valuable because then you can know what types of therapies, what dosing of therapies, and what kind of a duration you might need to go about reversing that. So, yeah. So now we'll start talking about treatment considerations when iron is low. Quick recap, if you're with us on Instagram, welcome. I'll be here speaking for about another 15 minutes or so on Instagram. Then we'll go to a live Q&A session. That one will just be in the Zoom room. And if you want to join us, you're welcome to. We've got a link there on drchristiansen.com, and you can catch us right now in the Zoom. And you can also catch the replay from the prior events that we've done. So, okay, a few more topics. Treatment of low iron. I mentioned identifying the cause, the iron binders. We'll talk then about supplementation. So what are some of the big causes of this? Well, these are the more common ones, and menstruation can be a large one. Menstruating women, that especially if they have heavy periods, being low in iron is just about expected. So not an unusual thing at all. And it often can take supplementation to keep them stable. Another one can be low dietary intake. Now, there are a lot of options, like I mentioned, but there are those who are on highly restrictive diets. They may be following one of the popular autoimmune diets, or they've got a lot of food intolerances, or for whatever reason, they just may not be consuming any of those rich iron sources. So that can happen as well. Malabsorption, and I just touched briefly on thyroid gastric syndrome, celiac disease. Those are the two most common causes. Other things that cause chronic inflammation in the gut can cause that as well. There's cells called parietal cells the stomach makes, and parietal cells are responsible for properly ionizing iron and getting it dissociated from our food. Without all that working well, we can't absorb it effectively, and the carrier proteins can't bring it into the bloodstream. So it's quite easy to not absorb it, even if there's a good amount coming in. There's an old saying that you are what you eat. And that one's always annoyed me because you really aren't. What you eat went in your mouth and it's going to eventually go out your butt, but it's not really in you. It's only when you draw things across the intestinal lining into your bloodstream that stuff becomes you. So no, you're not what you eat. You are what you assimilate. And yeah, this is the thing to where some nutrients are just really tricky to assimilate. And if all the steps aren't lined up just right, they don't come in the bloodstream, even if they go in your mouth and down your intestinal tract. So yeah. I just saw a note about the link not showing up. I'm going to request and have the team, here we go, make sure that link is available for everyone. Give me 1 second, put a chat up. Here we go. So that'll be visible on Instagram for you guys. Let's see. You please post our live link on Instagram. There we go. All right. Thank you for letting me know that. That should be up momentarily. And yeah, you're welcome to come on in. Love to guys have you all there. So these are the biggest reasons that iron can become low. Some of these big causes, just more losses. And always good to sort out if there's suspicious factors like the heavy cycles or known digestive issues. It's not as worrisome, but you still want to be aware of it. The big thing is that we can also lose iron from chronic inflammatory disease, such as colorectal cancer. So if a man, right, so no menstrual cycles, no expected sources of obvious blood loss, if a man is suddenly becoming anemic, maybe they've also got some digestive issues as well, then that's significant. We want to know about that. So if there's no, and this is true, of course, for both genders, we always want to know, but when there's no other reasons of blood loss, then anemias become more important to explain. So yeah, we always want to be aware of the cause because they can also come from things that are more significant. So I want to touch briefly on iron binders and things that bind with it. And there's been quite a bit of talk about various anti-nutrients that bind up with nutrients. And in most cases, their effects are small. They're not very significant. So we'll hear about things like phytic acid and oxalates. Phytic acid we find in grains, beans, nuts, and seeds, pretty big range of plant foods. And what happens is things like that, they do bind with iron, they do bind with minerals, but I think there's been a misconception that they like sneak in the body and grab all your iron and then run out when nobody's looking. They don't bind that way. So if a plant food has, say, 10 milligrams of iron in it, and it also has some binders there, then you may net 8 milligrams of that iron. But in most cases, that's taken into account when the iron content is labeled. So it's not that it's taking iron from you, it's slightly reducing the iron that comes in from the food. So really not too worrisome for phytic acid or oxalates. Dairy calcium, the tannins from tea, coffee, wine. These are things that they're not going to make someone anemic, but if someone's marginal on their iron status, or if someone's consuming those with iron supplements, then they can have a binding effect and they may decrease that overall uptake. So then they can become more relevant, but otherwise not worrisome. So yeah, thank you, Josh. So those on Instagram, link just popped up. And here's a link by which you're welcome to come join us live on that studio audience. And love to have you. I'll be speaking here for another probably 5-10 minutes. Then we'll grab to do some live Q&A, and that'll take place back in the studio audience with the Zoom group. So iron binders, really not things you have to be fearful of, but just know that if you are struggling with iron, these are things that you may reduce, you may at least avoid with iron supplementation. I want to talk a bit about just that, how you build that up when it is low. You do want dietary sources, but it generally does take supplementation. Now, in the past, I talked a lot about supplementation and intravenous iron. We've been watching and we've looked at the formulation. Many that did need intravenous now can stabilize with supplementation. And I'll talk through how this is different. So the formulation of Easy Iron is a synergistic blend of ferrous fumarate, vitamin C, citric acid, and piperine. This hasn't been done before. And I'll talk now briefly about each of these things, what they do and what they bring to the table collectively. So for starters, ferrous fumarate. This is the more natural form of iron. We find this naturally occurring in mushrooms and also many other plant foods. This is one of the most concentrated versions of iron in supplementation. So the perk about that is you get more actual elemental iron per pill. So you require fewer pills and there's less need for a greater volume and less irritation because of that. Ferrous fumarate, it's also unique in that It's the exact form of iron used in cellular respiration, so cellular energy production. What that means is your body still treats it as iron and does all the iron things with it. But even before it dissociates iron, it can use the whole ferrous fumarate complex directly in mitochondrial energy production pathways. And for that reason, ferrous fumarate may give more of an energy boost than the same milligrams of iron from other sources. Now, vitamin C, and not a secret that vitamin C helps iron absorption, but it turns out that the effects are most pronounced when they're physically combined. So when they're mixed in the same capsule, when they're formulated together directly. And the data has shown exact proportions of vitamin C to iron. It differs per the type of iron, but these are things that I took into account. And when the ratios are proper, we can see about a 9-fold uptake in iron absorption. So 9 times as much coming into the bloodstream. The other perk is that iron in high oral amounts can cause gastric upset for some people. And much of that comes from iron oxidizing. So when iron is pre-mixed with vitamin C, it can greatly reduce the side effects from iron oxidation. In the past, it was thought that dietary vitamin C or vitamin C from separate supplements could have these effects. We now know that's probably not as effective, but when it is pre-mixed with the iron, we can greatly reduce some of the stomach irritation. And that's one of the real iron, the iron conundrums is that many people know they need it, they try to take it, but they don't tolerate an effective dose. There's scores of products in the market I see that are called gentle iron or various names of iron that or safe iron or iron that's less of an irritant or whatnot. In almost all cases, they're not therapeutic amounts of iron. So a lot of those products are 10, 5 milligrams, 20 milligrams of iron, and they're gentle because there's not enough to help. So you want enough to be effective and you want it not to be an irritant. It's not a win if a dose is so tiny that it doesn't bother you because it's not doing any good. It's only a win if it's helping. So I wanted this to be tolerable and therapeutic. I really wanted to get both of those. And this is one of the steps that helps us achieve that. Now, in scouring the literature on iron, thyroid disease, iron and gastric irritation, iron and gastric uptake, there's been quite a few papers on organic acids improving iron tolerability and improving iron absorption. I've not found any other products that made use on this, but there's a lot of data supporting this. It turns out that many organic acids are various molecules that are related to vitamin C. They're kind of like ascorbate, but they're not the same thing, and their effects can synergize. We find organic acids like this in citrus and vinegar and berries. Several organic acids were options, but citric acid has the greatest tolerability and also the most compatibility within formulation. So I also included citric acid in this formula. And then last up is piperine. So this is pretty cool. So we have Piper longum, Piper nigrum, and Piper methysticum. These are all different kinds of peppers. So piperine is from pepper. And long pepper, this is used quite a bit in Ayurvedic medicine. This contains an alkaloid called piperine. And piperine makes nutrients better absorbed. There's been really good data on this for iron, beta-carotene, curcumin, for selenium. Quick tip for anyone, if you do struggle with nutrient absorption, adding various versions of pepper, especially long pepper. There's a blend in Ayurveda called Trikatu, Trikatu, and that's a literal Sanskrit for the 3 hots. And that's contains a fair amount of this long pepper, but it raises absorption of nutrients. There's good data around that. Papers have shown that a low dose of iron can be 20 times more effective when it's bound with even small amounts of piperine. So we think about gut permeability as a bad thing. And in many contexts, it is a bad thing. But there's some types of intracellular permeability that are appropriate for nutrient uptake. And piperine helps that work more effectively. So piperine added in has no negative effects upon the bad parts of leaky gut, but it does help the right nutrients come into the bloodstream more readily. So synergistically together, we think about this as being a great way to stop hair loss, help people build up iron, even if other versions of iron by mouth did not work. You don't need a lot of it. In most cases, 1 pill a day can be effective. So better absorption, less gastrointestinal irritation. And for many people, they wouldn't need intravenous iron where they may have in the past. If you're coming on Instagram right now, welcome. There's a link just a few comments back, and that link can allow you to join us on Zoom. I'm just about to end the Instagram and go to some live discussion, some live Q&A. So you're welcome to come over there if you wish to continue on this with us. Also, you can see the slides that I'm referring to. So quick overview, big steps: identifying the cause, treating it when you can, limiting iron binders, and then adding in when it's needed in this format. So here's some cool stuff. So how much would you need? Well, this is an image. And again, you can get this one on drchristiansen.com. Just Google Alan Christiansen and iron. And this image allows you to take a look at labs and go through this flow chart. And first off, you can see, well, if everything is normal and ferritin's normal, you probably don't even need iron. So just forget about that. But if it is low, then it walks you through what else is abnormal with your iron labs, and then different amounts per body size. So let's say that ferritin is low, but serum iron is stable. So you've got the earliest version of a latent iron depletion. That puts you right here. Let's say you're over 154 pounds. So in that case, your total iron deficit is roughly 1,000 milligrams. Now, given the bioavailability of easy iron, that's going to be around 10 to 15 milligrams per day. So you can see that you're looking at about a month and a half to 3 months to fully reverse that at just a single pill per day. So with this, you can see how much you need to build up. When you're in the 1,500, 2,000 milligram range, it could be a bit more time, but I also talk about how you can dose the easy iron different if you've got a more marked deficiency. So most cases when your deficit is 500 to 750 milligrams, 1 a day is going to work just fine. And that's the case for most people. That's about how much iron they're lacking in circulation. If the deficit is in this 1,000 to 1,200 milligram range, we're thinking more like 2 capsules once daily. And those with the most marked deficits, the more significant anemias, they can consider 2 twice daily to reverse that. And as one progresses and reverses to these various levels of lab deficits, then that dose can be lowered proportionately. But yeah, most cases, just 1 per day can get the job done just fine. And this is meant to be used with the Daily Reset Bundle or the Daily Reset Pack. And iron is something that works in concert with a full range of other minerals, other B vitamins, and other micronutrients. So yeah, you want that with the others to have it work effectively. So that was my spiel on iron. And again, you can access these slides again on the replay. And there's a detailed blog that talks about that and shares some of those key images and graphs for you if you want to refer back to those. Instagram, folks, you've got the link there. You're welcome to come on over and join us. I'm going to cut loose from that platform and I'll go just with the studio audience and we'll start talking. Otherwise, everyone in Instagram land, have a great evening. Okay. There we go. All right. One less piece of tech in front of me. And I'm going to stop the screen share and make my screen less of a mess. You guys should see all the windows I have open that I'm juggling right now. All right. Let's clear a bunch of these out of the way and we can focus in. There we go. Okay, so we've got a bunch of folks with us here tonight. Nice to see you all and lots of questions. So yeah, stay tuned, check these out. What I'm guessing is that several of the questions that come up will pertain to many of you. So I'll cover these in good detail. And again, I try to balance covering a lot of questions and covering questions thoroughly. And I'm going to fall on the thoroughly side because I think that I've gotten feedback that that's generally most helpful. So our power user, Sean, here got in right away and even put iron anemia question in his username, which is brilliant. So I can't ignore that. And if anyone can get on video, I totally love that. Please join in video if you can. If you can't, I get it. I've been on Zoom quite a while today. And if you didn't feel a need to get dressed or you get your background not right, I get it. Totally cool. But if you can join in video, please do. So Sean, it's your floor. Go right ahead.
Well, thank you for addressing this subject. It's a fascinating tie-in to thyroid. And I'm excited to better the presentation answered some of my questions, which was fantastic, but it also brought up some contradictions that I hope to flesh out with you. So
sure.
Essentially my question leading into today was, at what point during the various stages of iron deficiency anemia does the thyroid begin to be negatively impacted? I know now that the level at which the thyroid is impacted might not be the level at which you need to restore to improve function. So I see it sort of a moving target. And I looked at the thresholds that you presented, which in some cases don't seem to be consistent with certain lab reference ranges, which
they're not always, right?
Yeah.
And there's been published data about that too.
Okay. So essentially, because this is such an important topic, if it's plausible or reasonable, I would like to give you a context with which you could consider and maybe share your thoughts. So in a middle-aged man with iron deficiency anemia, so below range hemoglobin, and low RBC, low platelets, but within normal limits, serum iron at 93, iron saturation at the low end of normal, but within normal limits, elevated UIBC, elevated TIBC, elevated transferrin, ferritin right at the cutoff at 30, but within normal conventional reference ranges for LabCorp, for example. Your range goes down to 10, however, which was a surprise for me today. And I'm just curious, the MCV, looking at your chart right now, MCV is not
just
consistent.
Pause you real quick, Sean.
Yeah.
There are a lot more factors besides the ones you mentioned that get into some circumstances.
Yeah.
I can't actually diagnose or treat those things in this context.
Yeah.
So please know that you probably want to run that by your doctor. These are things to where it's more straightforward, more typical presentations that I'm talking about.
Yeah. So just to answer the very first question, at what point during the various stages of iron deficiency anemia does the thyroid begin to negatively impact it? I know that it needs to be back up over 100 to restore, but at what point does it become impacted?
So that's that first stage of latent iron depletion, which we can start seeing those issues when ferritin dips below the 50 to 60 range.
Below 50 and 60. So it's not the 10 in your chart. It's below 50 and 60, which is
and
optimal.
You'll see different reference ranges. And that was just one of the reference ranges that I put there. I wasn't saying that was where that everyone should be okay if they're above 10 by any means, but that's just one range you will commonly see.
Yeah, that's very helpful. Thank you for clarifying.
You're welcome. Yeah, good question. All right, let me go back here. And Tammy, let me remute real quick. Okay. Tammy, you are up next. Let's hear what you have this evening. There we go.
Okay.
There you go.
My question is, I was told I had low iron. I have a real issue with doctors right now. I was over medicated, but I got that number. I didn't get a number. I got that call from doing biofeedback. So is biofeedback a safe way to navigate your health, or just another tool?
The call from biofeedback, could you clear like a diagnostic?
I did a quantum biofeedback, so it's a two-way. It identifies things going on, and then it can go back. So one of the things was iron was low. Of course, that's all it tells you.
Sure.
Is that trustworthy? I'm new to biofeedback. I was just looking for alternatives.
Well, I'm sorry. So by sure, I'm getting your question. But that's not the final answer.
Right. Okay.
So there's
I was over medicated. Oops. Are you there? Okay. 7 years ago. And so part of my process is, as you identified, subclinical thyroid. Never heard that in all the doctors I've seen.
Okay.
And so I don't take thyroid medicine. Everything is normal every time I do it. I do have that up and down. Part of my question is, between all this in 5 or 6 years, I put on 80 pounds. So I did your quiz. I've looked at the books, but it's like, where would I start? Thyroid, adrenal, metabolism. At what point and what reset? Because I did the quiz and it was like, here, take this bundle and 4 other supplements. But it doesn't really, it doesn't really go to that point. So I'm trying to figure out. I've watched all the webinars, been on some live ones. So I'm trying to figure out, where do I start?
That's a great question. I'll give you the answer to that question. Then we'll talk about biofeedback diagnosis.
Okay.
So for that one, I'm trying to think about when it was that I talked about that sequence. Oh, I'm sorry. Never mind. That's the book that I just wrote. I got too many things juggling in my head.
I'll get the book.
So sneak preview, the book that I just finished last week, I'm talking about 5 really big symptoms of hormone imbalances and food ways to reverse them. And one of the 5 symptoms is weight. Sneak peek. So we're talking about weight, brain fog, fatigue, hot flashes, and insomnia. And I argued that all these symptoms, of course, one can cause or interact with the others, but the one that's in a class by itself, probably affecting the most, is weight. The pro-inflammatory effects of it drive everything else. So in that manuscript, I'm talking about prioritizing that. Like whatever else you do, if this is one of the concerns, start with it. So to do so, the cool thing though is that you can get a very easy twofer on the metabolism reset and the thyroid reset. So the metabolism reset is a structured 28-day thing where you're doing meal replacement to reset stored fuel in the liver. And basically you're doing protein shakes, breakfast, lunch, and then a good dinner with lots of recipes. Now, the trick is, if you take a look at the food list in the thyroid reset diet, all you do is stay within the green light foods as you do the metabolism reset. And you get a twofer. Now, there aren't that many foods in the metabolism reset that aren't green light foods. They pretty much all are. Some of the few that are not, there's occasional use, or I'll talk about optional use for those of whole eggs as part of a protein source, or as non-fat Greek yogurt or cottage cheese as an occasional protein source. They're not things I say, do this, or saying these are options. With the thyroid reset, those wouldn't be good options. And then there's also many seafood options that I give in the metabolism reset for proteins also, some of which would not be green light foods on the thyroid reset. Right. So that's about all you got to think through to do them both at once. So
maybe that's a blog. Maybe you can do that as a blog thing for us, chart out.
It's in the thyroid reset diet, the green light, yellow light, red light foods. The full lists are there.
That's okay. Go ahead with the biofeedback, because the
biofeedback. So this would go into the category of like energetic diagnostic techniques. There are a lot of those. Some of those involve, for example, muscle testing. You would hold something to your body. Someone would, do a test and say, the idea is that if you were much weaker while you were holding it, that was bad for you. That's the rationale behind that. And then there's devices called electroacupuncture bowl techniques, which they read bioelectrical impedance. When someone does a lie detector test, if they start to sweat, their skin conducts electricity faster. And that's one of it's called a galvanic skin response. But yeah, that's also used in various things that are said to diagnose all these medical conditions. And then some get even more subtle than that. Some don't involve anything actually touching you. And I was in my medical training, I was exposed to some of these things. One was the muscle testing. And there was a doctor who trained us in that and talked about how to do that. And he argued that he could diagnose, various things, see what was most effective. He was well-intentioned. He helped people. And I was curious. I was intrigued. And I thought, well, our classroom was adjoining a medicinary. And in the medicinary, there was a compound. It was called hexane. And they also call it goof off. So it's like it's a solvent. It's a stain remover. And it's toxic stuff. It's nasty. It's a horrible solvent. But yeah, it's a commercial stain remover. And someone had spilled that in a different area not too long ago. And a lot of folks were sick from that. There was a lot of headaches. A lot of people were, they felt awful from it. And so it was nasty. And what I thought was, let's do an experiment. Anyone should test weak. If somebody was going to make you test weak, that should make anyone test weak. So I got all these little dropper bottles with purified water. And I think there was like 18 of them. And I had 2 of them that contained hexane. And it was a lot of work to wash those things off so you couldn't smell it on the outside. But I got it to where you couldn't tell the difference. They were all numbered. And so what happened was people were muscle testing all these different students for all these bottles. And in theory, the water should have been strong and the hexane should have been really weak. And this person was happy. He thought that this was a good idea. We could see how well it worked. And we had hundreds and hundreds of data points of different people testing different people. When it was all said and done, it was worse than random chance. So that was one exposure I had. There's also a thing called Nambudrapad acupuncture elimination technique, which is quite similar. And they've done published studies on that, showing also that it's probably around random chance as far as accuracy. Now, there's a lot of times where the people that do that have good insights. They can make observations that you could probably make otherwise. Like they might suspect someone could have a thyroid issue, and they well might. One of the symptoms that point towards that. So there's no harm for those things being starting points. But kind of a crude joke, you wouldn't play Russian roulette and muscle test and say, "Oh, that's safe to pull the trigger." Like I wouldn't do that.
Right.
I'd want to look and see if I had a chance. I wouldn't want to just, So those things are harmless enough. They're fine to get a ballpark idea, perhaps, but I wouldn't consider them data points you could use to like adjust a thyroid dose or decide whether or not to do a biopsy or, do important things like that. And
yeah, I mean, and she tells you that. I mean, it's a quantum, hooked up arm, legs, and head, and she reads whatever, and then it comes back with things to do or adjust or helps your body. I'm very new to that, but I went that route because I had been over medicated. 3 or 4 things with doctors.
Over medicated. So this is when you were on thyroid treatment, or
I was on NP thyroid. And, it wasn't losing weight. The numbers were still around 3 and 4. I was new to the whole, find out for yourself kind of thing. And so she doubled it. So it went from 90 to 180. So within 30 days, I thought I was dying. I thought I'd had a heart attack. I went to endocrinology specialists in Baylor. They took me off NP and said, look, let's do Synthroid. I can control that dose. Completely over medicated again, meaning I couldn't move. And I didn't know Synthroid was a half-life drug. So what I learned, half of it dissolves the day you take it. The other half doesn't dissolve for 6 to 10 days, which means on any given day, it's 4 to 5 pills you're dissolving. You don't know. And the endocrinologist research specialist was like, yes, that's true. I'm like, well, you just told me you could regulate this better than NP.
So you're both right. So, and the funny thing is, the idea about it being better regulated, that's not true. So there was a large study done at Kaiser Permanente in California a couple of years ago, and they pulled records of people who were on natural thyroid versus those on synthetic. And they looked back to see how many people required more adjustments and more testing. It was no different. There was no advantage that way. So Synthroid is a T4 medicine, and Armour thyroid or desiccated thyroid is T4, T3, and T2. And T4 takes longer to eliminate. The half-life is actually on the order of a week or more. So you could take it daily and have a steady blood level. If you missed a day a week, your blood levels wouldn't change that much for a T4. But you're totally right. You were over-medicated in both cases, and that wasn't a good thing.
And I can't even touch it. It's like I'm allergic to it. So I deal with it with a homeopath, and I have for 7 years. And we've done well. I mean, everything's normal, but the weight is the one thing I cannot get to budge and have put on.
Well, so here's the thing.
And hormones. I guess that's part of all of that. I mean,
and the weight can completely come from thyroid disease. It can come on from that. But here's the thing that's just completely not fair. My experience is that when someone says my thyroid goofed up, I put on a lot of weight from that. Well, when their thyroid is perfect, maybe about 20% of the time, their weight just melts off with no other steps. So even when you fix the cause, it's kind of like Humpty Dumpty. Once it falls down, maybe a seatbelt would have kept him up, but a seatbelt won't put the pieces together again. So even when you fix that problem, that doesn't always reverse the weight. It makes it more possible. If it's not fixed, the odds of weight loss success are extremely low. But when it is fixed, that by itself almost never causes weight loss. There was an idea for a long time in medicine that you could take anyone, give them a bunch of thyroid medicine, and they would drop weight. And to this day, there's black box warnings in all thyroid medicines because so many people died from that misunderstanding. Yeah. It's just not true.
Yeah, I nearly did. I mean, I cannot even tell you what I went through. I've just never experienced that. So I have a little bit of concern when you see these doctors and researchers. So that's why I went biofeedback. I was like, okay, I just want to make sure nothing else is going on. We did blood work and all that, but it's just a frightful thing.
Yeah. Jump on the metabolism reset. We've got a great,
I will.
Unless you're someone who's like totally averse to Facebook groups, we've got an awesome Facebook group.
I don't have Facebook or Instagram. I'm sorry. I do not.
That's okay. It's in the book. It's all in the book.
Okay. Then I'll get the book. And I thank you so much for this. I've learned a lot. I really appreciate your time.
You're welcome. Take care of yourself, Tammy.
You too. Thank you.
Let's grab a couple more questions here still. Let's see who's up and who's visible. Marta's here. Marta, what have you got for us tonight? I'll ask to unmute. There you go. Are you able to unmute on your end, Marta? There you go. You got it.
Yes. All right, Dr. C. So I checked my ferritin in February, and it's 93. And
you said 93?
Yes.
Okay.
And I have long-standing hair loss, and it's diffused. And I'm thinking, just to know if iron deficiency is the reason, what level would I have to get to, and for how long to really see if the iron deficiency is the reason?
That's a good question. So, and again, like I said to Sean, there's a lot of variables, but assuming the rest is stable enough, then when ferritin is in the 90s, you're right on the cusp. So the papers that talked about needing to be above a certain threshold thought that threshold was like 90 or 100. So you're somewhere right around there. Now, there's a really important part of your question is how long would you need to be there? So hair loss, I'm really glad you asked that because hair loss is one of the most slowest to develop and one of the slowest to reverse symptoms. And how quickly things change is a function, I should back up. I think about symptoms in two categories. There's those of how the body works and those of how the body is built. So function and structure, right? So structural symptoms could be like, loose joints or dry skin or hair loss or sore muscles. It's how the body's built, thinning, bone loss. So structural symptoms, the time frame for them to repair is latched on to how quickly those cells regenerate. So for example, brain cells regenerate incredibly slowly. Bone cells are quite slow as well. So when someone has bone thinning, they can't reverse that tomorrow, no matter what you do, because it takes that long for new bone cells to come in. Hair follicles are rather slow, plus they have these slow cycles of activity to dormancy. So they can go quiescent for 3 to 6 month periods, and they take about 3 months or more to form. So when you put that together, if you had a clone and magically that clone was in the circumstances that would cause hair loss like today, that hair loss might not show up for a year or a year and a half. And then magically, if you could reverse those circumstances, it might take 6 months or a year and a half to see it totally reverse. So that's a really important point to bear in mind. You may have corrected that enough to where it'll help. It may not have shown up yet. For assurances, you may want to work up a few more points, but it can be a slow process.
And how should I be sure that I don't overdose on iron? And please remind us about the danger of having too high iron.
Sure. Yeah, great point. Thank you for mentioning that. So of course, one can get too much. And this is something that you wouldn't really take unless there was a need for that. And in the big scheme of things, however, when there's any indication for requiring iron, the dangers of overdosing in the short term, by the short term, even like months or even like a year or so, those dangers are quite low. There's so many people that struggle hard and they take tons of supplements and various types. They can't get it to budge. So the concern about someone taking it and in a few months suddenly being dangerously high, really not likely. There's some rare conditions called hemochromatosis, and those are conditions where the body absorbs far too much iron. One of the many ways we can regulate iron is we absorb more when we need more, and we absorb less when we need less. For some people, that switch is stuck in the on position, and they're always holding on to too much of it. Those folks can be at risk for building up even more, of course, if they're supplementing with it. But they're not the ones to get iron deficient. They're not going to do that. So someone who actually gets iron deficient their risk of getting an iron excess in the course of even like a year is really, really small.
Because I've been taking, let me see, I'm looking at my notes. I'm taking iron probably for the last 2 years, if not longer, from encapsulation. What's the name? Just, it doesn't matter what's the name. So, okay, I'm taking 100 milligrams. No, it's vitamin C, sorry. Iron is bisglycinate, 28 milligrams with vitamin C, and I've been taking it for at least 2 years. So
you take how many of those pills?
One per day.
That's probably not change iron levels at all. So most types of iron, a minimal effective daily dose is about 200 milligrams, and you're getting 28 per day. So with the synergy of piperine and the citric acid, that allows us to get as low as 60 to 100 milligrams and still have it be therapeutic. But without that, it almost never budges at less than 200 milligrams per day. So your risk of excess is zero, and the likelihood that even change your iron is quite small.
Okay, and one short question. What is the, how to space out taking iron with other supplements?
Yeah. Good question. So another consideration about fumarate and the combination is that it can be done with the other items in the Daily Reset bundle, including the calcium. Other forms of iron, they are better off being away from food and at least 4 hours removed from dense sources of calcium. When you get down to the interactions between minerals, iron, zinc, calcium, if you followed every possible rule, you would take all of them like hours away from the others, but it's not possible and it's not practical. So one thing that I was really proud of and worked hard on in the formulations was to make it to where you didn't have to have like 50 rules. There's a book. Has anyone seen the You're Only Old Once by Dr. Seuss? Anyone else seen that book? I'm seeing no other hands go up. You guys, this is like recommended reading. This is like mandatory reading. You're Only Old Once. It's a book. It's called, the subtitle is something in the book for obsolescent children. And I think most of us that manage our health in a lot of ways, we're doing the same sort of things that this character does in this Dr. Seuss book. It's not a kid's book at all. It's totally about his experience in the medical system. But he's got this one page. He comes, this poor old man is like carted all around this hospital, has all these mystifying, bizarre experiences. And then he goes to the pharmacy. And he leaves the pharmacy and he's got this bucket of pills. This is Dr. Seuss. It's hilarious. He's got this bucket of pills and he's got this protocol on how to take them. And it's the funniest thing ever. But it's, I take the 3 ones twice a day to keep my eyebrows strong and the blue ones twice at night. And if I die before I wake, then the 2 pills are the ones that I take. And but that's what these regimes end up becoming for people. And it just doesn't work. So I really wanted to make it simple. So yeah, you can do those together in the morning and they can be done an hour after thyroid medication. And that's the other concern about other versions of iron is they need more time after thyroid meds.
All right. Thank you very much.
You're welcome. Yeah, great question. Let's grab a couple more. So here's our mysterious Zoom user. And I'm guessing Zoom user is not on your birth certificate, but let's hear what you have for us.
I'm guessing that's me. So I actually see Dr. Roz, and
awesome.
I have had great successes on all the books, and I'm like down to the last little vestiges of issues, predominantly brain fog for me. And my last visit, not my last visit, but the visit before that, I got an iron infusion, got my levels up to just right around 100. And
great.
By the time I came back for my next visit, my iron levels were back down to below 30.
Okay.
And I still have my period. I don't feel like I bleed excessively. And I'm wondering if I'm going to forever just going to be needing iron infusions because Dr. Ross had said that I might some people get an iron infusion and feel terrific within hours, and sometimes it takes weeks. And for me, after my first infusion, it was probably a month. And by the end of the month, I was like, wow, I am like worlds different. But it took that long. And I had thinning hair. My hair's coming back a little bit.
Cool.
My thyroid levels are better, but I can't figure out why I can't hold on to it. And I don't know. like I said, if infusions are going to be the only thing that are going to work for me and indefinitely, and I'm curious about that.
They can work great. They can build levels up again. There are those where they can drop off. And one solution can be just doing a couple of them close together to get to a higher amount. But even in those cases, I would encourage adding the easy iron because you're much less likely to drop off as fast, if ever. This is a newer thing. We've already been seeing really good feedback from it. And a lot of folks that, just like you described, now can build up and stay there even without the infusions. So yeah, please do just add that in and see how you do. If the symptoms are pressing, you're welcome to repeat your infusions to get topped off quickly. But I doubt that you would need repeat ones after that with adding easy iron.
So I also have a yeast allergy, and I know sometimes they tell you to steer clear of mushrooms, anything from the fungi family. I don't know if that would, exclude me from wanting to try the supplement.
It's a really good question. So I should have clarified that better. So ferrous fumarate is the kind of iron that we find from mushrooms. It's not taken from mushrooms. So it's not, it's not from mushrooms. It happens that mushrooms have that kind of iron, but the product is not made from mushrooms. So you're not alone. A lot of folks are in that boat. They avoid various yeast products or mushrooms, but that's not an issue that way. Okay,
great. I think that actually might have been the only questions that I had. That's actually it for me.
Right. That's great. Thank you.
Thank you.
Okay. Lower hand. There we go. And next up, looks like we've got David here with us again. How you doing, David? Asked to unmute. There we go. Looks like your mouth is faster than your microphone. There you go.
Okay. So I just got a fast general question. There seem to be these two different viewpoints out there on figuring out iron deficiency. One is ferritin, and that's your main thing, plus symptoms, of course. And then there's this whole other group of physicians out there, and they say focus more on iron saturation or transferrin saturation, TIBC. Sure. Even maybe your friend Chris Masterjohn, PhD, that's what he says. Look, your iron saturation. So I'm just wondering, why are there these two different viewpoints? Are they looking at the evidence in a different way? Why these two different groups of two different markers are looking at?
All the markers are relevant. And I take a good look at my blog article. I reference that well and explain that really well. But there's just different stages to it. So and there's typical courses of events as one works through varying levels of iron deficiency. Typically, the first course of events is that stored iron starts to dip down.
Yeah, I'm sorry.
Go ahead.
You're saying, I read it super carefully, and you're saying the first thing to look at is the ferritin decreasing, and these other people, they say, well, the first thing to look at is the saturation decreasing. And I'm just wondering, I'm a layperson, a computer guy, I don't know. I'm just wondering why they have these different viewpoints. They say, look at the iron saturation decreasing first, like Masterjohn.
Sure. Yeah.
I don't know.
This is pretty straightforward stuff in hematology. There's really not debates about this in hematology or in the main circles. What happens is the body prioritizes iron stores to have iron available for times of deficit. And that's where it's held on to. So at the first levels of deficiency, the stores start getting tapped into. When the stores finally get depleted, then we start seeing it show up in these other ways. The body has lots of examples to where it will prioritize its resources and use them in ways to where they're most effective, and when things and try to compensate for varying losses. This is one more example of that.
Okay.
So yeah, there's really no debate in the conventional world or in hematology about it.
No debate. Okay. So we don't know where they're getting these ideas from then. All these other guys. Okay.
And transfer, all the markers I mentioned are relevant, and they're all things that need to be read in context together. But yeah, this is a pretty straightforward thing.
Okay. That's it. Thank you.
You're welcome. Yeah, good. And looks like Sue's up here. We got a Sue and a Susan, but Sue is up next. And I got you on video too. So go for that, Sue.
Is that me?
Yeah, that's you.
Okay, great. Thanks for taking my question. I'm one of those people that has too high of an iron level. And I can't seem to, my doctors can't seem to figure out why that is. And so I'm kind of looking for answers. So Interestingly, I have a lot of the symptoms of low iron. And as you say that, is that possible that having too iron could cause those same symptoms?
It's totally possible. One thing I should mention too, I'm doing my thyroid second opinions these days. I actually mentioned that because I did a couple of those earlier today. They're a lot of fun. I talk at deep levels with individuals. That's a context in which I can really diagnose these things at a granular level. So that's an option for you guys, thyroidopinion.com. I think I've got a few of those open next month still, and then I'm pausing probably until the fall. But yeah, if anyone wants to talk one-on-one and get more detailed answers about their personal findings, that's totally an option for everyone. In terms of ferritin being higher, and I'm sorry, you said iron being higher, and there's a lot of ways.
But I mean, it was my ferritin levels that were.
Yeah, thank you. I was going to guess that. That's the most common way that it shows up. And that can happen for a lot of reasons. Some of those reasons actually do overlap with low levels of iron stores, believe it or not. So what happens is, and back to the question David had, when the body has some acute phase inflammatory reaction, it'll often push a lot of iron into stores. And what happens is the way we react to certain types of chemical threats or illnesses, we do the same tricks for a lot of different things that are not the same. So in the case of infectious disease, in the case of some bacteria thrive and they utilize our circulating iron to fuel their growth. So they grow quicker when they can access our iron. So we take iron away from them and we suck that away in our storage. We take it out of circulation and push it in storage. And so ferritin, stored iron, goes up in those cases, and serum iron, transferrin, they can start to dip down. And funny thing, this is a brief aside, but almost all the more common genetic disorders had an advantage at some point in time. So bacterial infections. So let's go back to 13th century Ireland. So we had the Black Death in full force. Yersinia pestis took out somewhere around a third of the population. And remember how the body wants to take iron away from bacteria. So some people, they assimilate, and they put more iron in storage than they should. And we call that hemochromatosis. Now, when someone has hemochromatosis, if they're diagnosed, if they're treated with blood donation, they can lead a normal lifespan. They can do fine from that. But back in 13th century Ireland, the healthcare of the time did not know to diagnose and treat hemochromatosis. So those who had it, provided they survived long enough to adulthood, they probably wouldn't make a full adult lifespan. They'd probably make it to their 50s at best. However, if earlier in life they were exposed to the bubonic plague, they were much more likely to survive because they were even better at hiding the iron away from the infection. They could pull iron out of their bloodstream like nobody's business. And so the thought was they were more likely to survive. They were more likely to have kids. And that trait became much more common. So to this day, those with Irish and Celtic ancestry have much, much higher rates of hemochromatosis. And we think it's because they got through the Black Death better than their peers who didn't way back when.
Well, that's interesting because I'm Irish, and that would have been my ancestors.
Probably don't have hemochromatosis, though.
No, they actually tested me for that, and I don't have that. So
the most common cause of high ferritin is fatty liver. So remember how ferritin is stored in the liver. So with fatty liver, normal liver triglycerides become excessive, and stuff gets in, but stuff can't get out. And more things stay stuck than would otherwise stay stuck. And ferritin is one of those. A lot of other things can cause high ferritin, but barring other obvious reasons, that's one of the more typical ones of it. So we see a lot of folks do the metabolism reset, for example, that they're doing it to help their liver. And a lot of them will see that their ferritin is one thing that also normalizes and goes back down as they do it.
Well, I have a concern about that because I also have a polycystic liver, and I think that it may be causing some other issues, medical issues for me. So if I wanted to do like a really deep dive into how I was processing liver, my GP doesn't really know where to go with this. Like what kind of a doctor would I be looking for, and what kind of tests would I request, or what would my
the first question's more important. When you're with the good doctor, they'll know what to test. And if you got to tell the doctor what to test, then you got to tell the doctor how to read the test. And now you're just in trouble. So as far as medical categories, that's going to be a gastroenterologist. Okay. As far as the ones that deal with liver disease, there are hepatologists that are liver specialists. They're quite rare. Much more typically be looking at a gastroenterologist.
Okay.
And, some might talk about having a more of a liver focus. They might say that, but that's where you'd start that out.
Yeah. Okay. Thank you very much. That's helpful.
You're welcome.
And I'm definitely going to look for that Dr. Seuss book.
Seriously, you guys, you've got to check this out. I had a copy and it didn't make one of the moves. I'll have to get another copy again. It's the funniest thing in the world. We also had a copy at our office for quite a while. All right, let's get a couple more. I'm seeing a lot of hands up. Let's see. What do we got? Vanessa, you're here. Go for it. What have you got for us tonight?
Oh, thank you. Actually, it's kind of related to what Susan was saying. I've had a history of problems absorbing iron. 15 years ago, I had transfusions and they worked, but now my ferritin has been dropping, and it was 74 a few years ago. Now it's 10. My TIBC is high. But my iron is high at 233, and I'm very confused. I don't know if I should supplement or not. I have an appointment coming up with a hematologist, but it's not for a couple months. So I don't really know, what to do in the meantime or why my iron would be high.
This is the thing. I'd love to give all the information I can. There is more context on that. And so that would be a matter of needing more personal clarity to know whether you should take it or not. So yeah, do follow up with hematologists. If you can do that sooner, you can sure do so. Yeah.
But you don't think it'd be a good idea to just supplement now?
From what you said, that wouldn't be an obvious thing.
Okay. Thank you.
Yeah, that's also an option for a thyroid second opinion consult. That's available if you'd wish. There probably are some of those open still, but yeah, good thing to sort out.
Have you heard of that before, though? Like, I'm not the only
person. There's tons of patterns that can show up, and there's a lot of variables to that as well.
Okay. Thank you.
You're welcome. Okay, who's up here? Sureka. I hope I got close on that. That's a pretty name. How you doing this evening?
Thank you, doctor.
Was I in the ballpark there?
Yeah, you pronounced it really good. Yeah.
Good.
Thank you. So I had heavy menstrual cycles and polyps a few years ago, and I started becoming anemic, and my ferritin level is 24, and I started being thyroid from last 1 year. So would I be a right candidate for using the easy iron supplementation?
Yeah, barring other abnormalities, that's the range where symptoms can start to show up for people. Yeah.
So I have a severe hair loss, and even my hairline receded as well. So if I start supplementing with easy iron, would that help me with the hair loss?
Yeah, and the question we had earlier was great to illustrate the time frame, to give some realistic time frame expectations. Worst case scenario, it may take elevating back up to that 90 to 100 range to see that really stop, and then it may take several more months to see regrowth come in again. But yes, that generally does reverse. But you guys ever see those chia pets back when they were in the commercials, where you put the chia seeds and like the hair all shoots out of it like overnight? And we're not like that, unfortunately. When it works well, it can work, but it can be a slow process.
Okay, sure. Thank you.
You're welcome. Okay, let's grab a couple more still here. We'll start winding down pretty quick. Deborah, you've been waiting patiently. What do you have for us this evening?
Okay, hello.
Hey there. Deborah and friend.
Oh, yeah, that's my buddy. So I have a long history of fatigue, and I'm very active. I'm a runner. I work out a lot. I do have heavy menstrual cycles. I have been tested where I do have malabsorption issues. My ferritin.
Defined?
Yeah, I had the D-xylose test.
Okay.
So that's for carbohydrates, correct?
Yeah.
But I have gut issues and stuff. So my question is, about 5 years ago, finally it showed that I had anemia. And so I had two iron transfusions, and I felt amazing for like 5 days. And then I dipped down And then because all the other levels look good, she was like, oh, you're fine. So now with this new doctor who is looking at ferritin, about 8 months ago, I was at 15. I've been taking like 4 of the Ferrosol pills every day, and I'm still only at 30. I've only gone up 15. My question is,
over what time frame?
8 months.
Okay.
So I've been taking quite a lot of iron. With the malabsorption issues, am I just like running circles?
That could be a factor for it, but you probably could see better absorption with the easy iron over the Ferrosol. So you are making some headway. So there's a lot of situations that, I don't know, people can often absorb even when they're told they can't. There are some circumstances that are different, especially the thyrogastric syndrome. But in many of those cases, I mean, you are absorbing it. You are making some headway. So it's not that there's none happening. Do you know your total daily dose of iron that you're getting from those?
I don't. I can go grab the bottle, but it's whatever the standard is. I was supposed to take 1 a day. That's what I started with no change. Then it was 2 once a day, and now it's 2 times a day.
Yeah, take a peek at the charts. Per size, you'll probably come out in that range of even 2 once daily for the easy iron. That probably would end up being more effective. But just female menstruating, being active, running specifically, those are all things that cause more hemolysis. And it's an uphill battle, but it's one that you can win.
Awesome, thank you.
You're welcome. Okay, let's see. We got Bethany here. Hey, Bethany, are you going to come on video and say hi? I got friends here. They should at least do that. There she is. How you been?
I'm going to try and stay on video, but it might not hold me with my. But hello. Yes. So, question about my iron again. So I know that I think I have a hard time absorbing, and we were talking before about my hemocreatin and my hemoglobin being consistently high clear back in 2017, and it stayed on the higher end. And then my ferritin is less than 10 right now. I did have 1 iron infusion, and it went up like 2 points to like 17. So I'm still, is there anything else I should be testing with Dr. Espinal? Any other or anything?
So just so everyone knows, this is someone I know personally. I've looked at your case specifically. There's really no big stones unturned, but I would just be more aggressive. What happens is that it either with a full dose of easy iron or more of the infusions, when you're very low, your body first goes towards filling up the reserves before there's much more iron in circulation. So you can have a dose that's helpful, but doesn't fully replete you, and your stores may not budge. They might even go down. So your response was not unusual. That doesn't mean there's something weird about you. It just means you didn't get enough.
and it's going to be okay if I do infusions with my hemocreatin and my hemoglobin being so high.
And again, this is an unusual situation, everyone. I know your case. So yes, you can proceed with those again.
Okay. And any reason why I shouldn't be doing like long distance running or anything like that will complicate that anymore?
It'll make it take a bit longer, but there's benefits to health. I wouldn't really compromise your activity because of that. No.
Okay. All right. I just find that I obviously don't recover as fast as I used to when I feel like my levels were normal.
Sure.
So
you'll do better when that gets back up again.
Okay. I guess that's all.
You take care of yourself. Okay, let's get a couple more. I don't see a name at all there's someone here. She has glasses, shoulder length hair, and there's no name at all on her Zoom thing. So if that sounds like you're on video and it says ask to unmute, you can try for that. But yep, you just waved. So that was you. But you don't have a Zoom username showing up at all on my end for some reason. I can't hear you just yet. There should be a way to unmute and activate your microphone. I tell you what, I promise I'll come back, take a peek at that, see if you can find it. And maybe this is how I've got my screen. Oh, here we go. Oh, there was Audra. That was odd. The names weren't showing up for a moment. This was Audra. Okay. Do you see how to unmute there just yet? No, I'll keep looking. Let's get Janet, and then we'll go Janet and Audra and probably wrap up. So Janet, go ahead.
Hi, how are you?
I'm doing great. How about yourself tonight?
Good. Not too bad. I'll just run by quickly. The last probably 5 years, I've had symptoms of hair loss and fatigue. And more recently, the last couple of years, some autoimmune markers, some thyroid antibodies, and some polysensory neuropathy symptoms. So I was just looking at my labs for iron, actually. And and I noticed, like, I've never been below any of the markers, but I'm always at the very, very low end for like ferritin, iron, TIBC. Except the transferrin saturation, which I don't know. I don't have units written down here. I'm in Canada, so I don't know if the units are different. That seems to be in the normal range. So I was wondering, maybe I've never taken iron except years ago, and it never sat right. I could never tolerate it. So maybe that easy iron, that would be something I could look at taking.
Yeah, for those to whom iron is not contraindicated and they have indications for it, it's a version that's better tolerated and more effective. So, yeah.
Oh, okay. Because even if your iron levels are just above the range, that would still mean you're low?
Yeah, so take a peek. There's a detailed article I have that kind of summarizes those things and makes it an easier to see format. And the main thing that can be normal but still relevant is ferritin. So when that's below a more optimal range, then they can start impacting thyroid function.
Okay, it's at 133, so I don't know what that's micrograms per liter.
Yeah, that wouldn't be a deficit then.
That's not a deficit.
No.
So the easy iron, maybe not the way to go?
You wouldn't need that. No.
Oh, okay, so there's other issues I should pursue.
Yeah, your iron's probably not a factor for things. Assuming the rest of your, and again, I can't give detailed stuff, that, but from what you said so far, there's really no suspicious iron problems.
For hair loss or anything like that. Okay, yeah. Even if the iron or the TIBC is low? No?
Correct.
Okay. All right. I'll keep looking.
Keep looking. No luck there, Audra. Tell you what, if you can put something in chat, I'll watch for that. If that's an option to get a bit of a note in there. Not as efficient as just speaking, but I'll give a second to see that show up. Does not allow me to unmute. So yeah, on my end, I can hit ask to unmute, and I keep hitting it over and over and over again. It's not helping. Yeah, anyone else, if you had a question, if there's a bunch more hands up, I still see here, but I'm going to wind down. If you put things in chat right now, Audra, I'll watch for yours. If something comes up right away, I'll just address that immediately. But everyone else, if you didn't have things we covered, yeah, please put that in chat. This is stuff that I'll make more content from. Now that I just finished the next book, I'm going to start writing a big new group of blogs and posts and videos. And I'm going to write about whatever you guys are asking about, whatever's important that we want to make better sense out of. So yeah, please make that clear and know that even when the event is over, I still save these chats and download those and make sure these are topics that I'm covering. This is the last in this series. I've had fun with these. I think I've gotten feedback. They've been quite helpful. So I'm thinking about a process by which I can have a recurrent topic and a recurrent Q&A session, perhaps on a monthly basis. So stay tuned. I should be getting some ideas like that coming out in the coming weeks or month or so. So watch for that. And here's from Audra. Dr. S prescribed iron infusion. Hematologist said to do 500, 2 doses, 3 days apart. Sure. So there are different dosage structures that can be given that are equally effective. And the 500/2 doses, 3 days apart, neither of those are too much. It's quite safe. There are those that can have some of the expected and known reactions to iron when they get on the higher dosing side. None of those are life-threatening, but some can be unpleasant. So Dr. Roz's doses are ones that can be effective. You would need multiples of those, but it can work just fine either of those regimes. The lower amounts are less apt to cause reactions, but they can work quite well. It's really a matter of just knowing what your total needs are and making sure you get enough to build that back up again. So yeah, that's quite reasonable. But hopefully that was useful there. And yeah, good to see everyone. again, last in the series of these webinars, but I've enjoyed these. I think these have been helpful and I've gotten good feedback. So I'm going to figure out some way to do more of them. In the meantime, I'll be back this coming Monday for regular office hours. Welcome to join me then. And then off for a bit. My lovely wife and I are going to be celebrating our 26th anniversary. So we'll be taking some downtime and offline for a little bit, and that'll be a good thing, but back real soon. All right, so have a great evening, guys. Take good care of yourselves. Bye-bye.